there's a moment that happens in almost every group conversation. Someone tells a story, another person jumps in with a joke, someone else quickly adds their opinion before the topic shifts again. The rhythm of the conversation moves fast, almost like a game of verbal ping pong. And somewhere in the group, there's a person who says almost nothing. They're listening, watching, occasionally they smile or nod. Sometimes they open their mouth to speak, but the moment passes and the conversation has already moved somewhere else. From the outside, it's easy to assume what's happening. People might quietly think that person is shy, or awkward, or maybe that they simply don't have anything interesting to add. In louder environments, quietness often gets interpreted as hesitation, insecurity, or even disinterest. But the reality inside that quiet person's mind is usually very different. Most people never see the amount of thinking that's happening in those moments. Because for some individuals, silence in a group isn't emptiness. It's processing. And this is where something important often gets misunderstood. When people talk about quiet individuals in social settings, the conversation tends to focus on personality labels. Introvert, reserved, passive, observant. Those words capture part of the picture, but they don't explain what's really happening. There's a deeper psychological process unfolding that most people simply don't notice. What we're really talking about is the psychology of people who stay quiet in groups. And in many cases, their silence has much less to do with confidence or social skill than people assume. Research in cognitive psychology has shown that individuals process social information at very different speeds and depths. Some people operate with what psychologists sometimes call fast expression systems. Their thoughts move quickly into words, often in real time. Speaking is part of how they think. But for others, the brain tends to process information internally before expressing it externally. In these cases, the mind is constantly analyzing multiple layers of what's happening in the room. What was just said, what someone meant by it, how other people reacted, what the emotional tone of the conversation is. Neuroscience studies on social cognition show that some brains activate stronger networks related to observation and emotional interpretation during group interactions. These networks are involved in reading subtle cues, facial expressions, tone changes, shifts in body language. So while the conversation on the surface might look simple, internally the brain may be tracking a much more complex map of what's happening socially. And when a mind is processing that many signals at once, speaking immediately isn't always the natural response. It's not that nothing is happening, it's that too much is happening at the same time. But this pattern rarely develops in isolation. It's often shaped by experience. For many quiet observers, this way of interacting with the world began much earlier in life. Some people grow up in environments where paying attention to subtle emotional cues was important. Maybe conversations in their household were unpredictable. Maybe they learned it early that understanding the emotional atmosphere of a room helped them navigate relationships more safely. Over time, the nervous system adapts. Instead of jumping quickly into conversations, the brain becomes very skilled at scanning the environment first. It gathers information before deciding how to respond. Psychologists sometimes describe this as a form of social vigilance. Not anxiety, necessarily, but a learned sensitivity to social dynamics. And once the nervous system develops this pattern, it tends to remain. Silence becomes less about holding back and more about understanding the situation before participating in it. Of course, it's important to say that none of this makes one style of social behavior better than another. Some people think by speaking, others think by listening. Groups need both kinds of minds. Because people who speak the least are often the ones who notice the most. They tend to remember small details others forget. The trade-off is that this awareness sometimes slows the moment when they finally decide to speak. Over time, people around them may form quiet assumptions. But none of this means something is missing. If some of these moments felt familiar, there's a good chance the story of the quiet mind goes deeper than it first appears.